What happens to the Nashville Predators if Filip Forsberg doesn't come back? David Poile said he had a plan B and a plan C. What are those plans, and who could be some of the people Nashville go after if Forsberg doesn't come back? Interesting topic up for debate today on the Locked On Predators podcast.
Your Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen of the day. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer and editor at ontheforecheck.com, and I have a partner in crime.
You do. I am Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at ontheforecheck.com.
Good to see you. Yeah, everybody. Sorry for not having an episode yesterday. We both felt terrible. As you can tell by the sound of my voice and appearance, still not feeling 100%.
It's been a whole thing. It's been a whole thing these last 24 hours, but we're bouncing back.
Yeah,
slowly.
Kind of in a week.
Yeah.
Today's show is one that I'm sure is going to grab a lot of attention. It is all about what happens if Filip Forsberg doesn't come back. Now, we've talked a lot about what happens if he does come back. Will he come back? We've covered that angle, but let's just say for, devil's advocate's sake, Filip Forsberg goes to test free agency. He's signed somewhere else. Then the question becomes, what do the Predators do? And that's kind of a topic because I'm sure a lot of people would just say, well, that should be the impetus to rebuild. But we heard David Poile in his year-end press conference last week where he basically said, no matter what happens with Forsberg, we're not rebuilding. In fact, we may reload. Like, we are going for this. So kind of an interesting debate.
Yeah, this is just, I feel like we have to have a content warning on this episode that it's just going to be really dark because if Filip Forsberg doesn't come back, we do have to think about what happens next. And that is an unpleasant topic. And I will say, Poile's press conference, that was one of the things that he said that surprised me the most, because I really feel like the assumption has been if you lose a piece like Filip Forsberg, that is a tear it all down. That is a start from the bottom and build up. You're looking at, 5 years of investing to get the Predators back in contention. And that's not at all how David Poile sees it. So he has to have been looking, and he's open and said there's a plan A, which is sign Filip Forsberg. There is a plan B. There's a plan C all the way through. And I think, okay, he's considered the fact that even though everybody wants Forsberg back, it may not happen. And Poile seems to think that he can make some moves that will keep the Predators in contention in the near future, and it won't be this whole tear it down thing. I think that was one of the most surprising things he said in that press conference, because to me, if you lose Filip Forsberg, that's a lot to replace. You're going to have to do some serious dancing and some serious work to replace that. But when you look at what's available and you look at the different ways that he could do it, I mean, maybe Poile can pull a rabbit out of his hat if Filip Forsberg doesn't sign.
Yeah, to me, it kind of makes me think, does Poile know something about somebody out there, either on the market or available via trade? Because, you kind of have the flashback to 2019 when PK Subban got traded, and then a week later, Matt Duchene signed on the dotted line. And then, it kind of came out and I was like, oh, this was kind of something that was going to happen for quite some time. So does that make me think that maybe Poile knows something about someone out there, or multiple people out there? Either is somebody available via trade that you think you're going to go get, maybe somebody you didn't really want to pull the trigger on at the deadline because you weren't sure where you were. Or is there a free agent that in the past has kind of expressed interest in coming to Nashville? And we're going to talk about a couple of potential free agents there, but it does kind of give you the vibe of maybe he thinks that if Forsberg goes, he has somebody lined up already. which is going to be like a very interesting debate because, as you mentioned, this losing Forsberg is losing, a big part of your team.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of
Yes.
goes hand in hand with bringing in some of these free agents because it's like, if you're a marquee free agent, are you going to want to play on a team that doesn't have Filip Forsberg?
He's a huge selling point for the Nashville Predators. If you look at his performance, especially this season, but just consistently, Filip Forsberg is a huge part of what the Predators do, how the Predators produce. He's just a huge part of this team. So if Forsberg is gone, what are you advertising? And
Right.
how are you bringing
you
people
still got
in?
Roman Josi.
I mean, that's not nothing. And Matt Duchene, I think, timing wise, having Matt Duchene have a year as good as Filip Forsberg or a little better in goals, that helps David Poile because, you do still have some things to say, hey, we do have components of a competitive team here. We've got Matt Duchene if we lose Filip Forsberg. And I think you're right. It is David Poile's job to have a good idea of what a viable plan B would be. And I like the Subban Duchene trade is a perfect example of that. He knows if A happens, then B. And I think, Forsberg, of course, is in the same position. So they're going to have to figure out what happens. But we all have to be prepared for what plan B is. And there are, as much as it would suck to lose Filip Forsberg, there are some options out there that, while our hearts might be broken, competitively speaking, there are some options out there.
And let's talk about that a little bit because let's say plan B is going out and taking a swing at a big free agent.
Yes.
In terms of forwards, if you're kind of looking at like tiers, tier A to me, there's 4 forwards on there who would probably be like the tier A. And that's Johnny Gaudreau, Filip Forsberg, Evander Kane, and Nazem Kadri.
Right.
Those are probably like the 4 like going to be, $9 million a year plus kind of guy.
Right. Yeah. There's a limited pool of actually replacing Filip Forsberg, but if you're going to, you're looking at that. That's the small pool that you can draw from.
That would be like a one person, replace kind of.
Right. Yeah. How do you feel about those options?
Well, I mean, let's look at it from this way. So let's kind of break down one by one and see, what if there is somebody there that A is a fit, B would want to come to Nashville.
Yeah.
I look at Johnny Gaudreau. Johnny Gaudreau obviously would be not only, I think, a replacement for Filip Forsberg, but probably an upgrade for Filip Forsberg. To be perfectly frank.
Yeah.
But he's also probably going to get, the type of these, he and Artemi Panarin have been by far the 2 best free agents to hit the market over the past, 6-7 years. So Gaudreau could probably make about $11 million a year plus. So if you're the Predators, are you going to want to spend that much on a guy, even though, yeah, he's worth it? B, if you're Johnny Gaudreau and this is kind of your one shot, there might be a better team out there than Nashville that may be a little bit closer to the cup.
Yes.
That would also be willing to give you that money. And let's also not forget, there's a good chance he still re-signs in Calgary.
Well, and I think
despite this series kind of looking like a train wreck.
Oh, gosh, bless. You wonder, though, if Poile is willing to pay $11 million for somebody like Gaudreau and Forsberg doesn't sign, it makes me think that Forsberg opts to leave. Because if you're going to drop $11 million, I think most people here would say drop it on Filip Forsberg.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably
it'll be interesting
to keep your guy.
Keep your guy. But if they can't, do they go all in on somebody like Johnny Gaudreau? And that is one I would say kind words to Forsberg in Swedish about. But Johnny Gaudreau would be a really interesting piece for Nashville. But I agree with you. Is he going to be willing to come to a team that no matter how you look at it, this team is going to be at least 2 years at least from probably being deep in the playoffs competitive? Is that really where he's going to want to be?
Sure.
No,
I heard you kind of tip your answer to this, but another person who is doing very well in the playoffs, we have to mention it. I mean, that's Evander Kane.
No.
But here's the thing, Ann. Remember during his whole sort of off ice drama, and he was down in the minors at times this year, one of the teams that went to scout him was the Nashville Predators, reportedly.
Yes, and they'll have to answer for that at some juncture. Look, I am all about putting together the best team that can compete on the ice to an extent. There is a point at which there are some players where their on ice production is not going to, no matter how great it is not going to overshadow off ice issues. And this is somebody who, and I'm all about redemption stories, but this is not somebody who I have seen do the work.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to judge, but I'm just saying as a Nashville Predators fan, as a fan of hockey, that is not somebody that I would want to see on the roster. Just full disclosure. And again, statistically, he is having a phenomenal playoff run.
One of the best players in the NHL, I think, this postseason.
Yes. And there's no denying that, but I just don't feel like I just don't feel like it's okay to put that on John Hines to make sure he manages, David Poile to manage. And I also think one of the things the Predators have going for them that is so key to keep and maintain is team chemistry. And so you're going to have to be really careful who you bring in. This is one that I just personally, no. I don't know. How do you feel about that? I mean, that's just
yeah. I mean, that's kind of the $1 million debate we see, not just in hockey or in sports, but kind of, in any sort of entertainment field. Yeah. It's like, can you separate the art from the artist?
Mm-hmm.
Would you be okay with Evander Kane if he can guarantee you 50 goals and 100 points a season and help you to some of your best years, despite the background that he brings to your team? And I'm not going to answer that question for anybody, because I think everybody has their own answer to that and their own rationale as to why they're answering the way they're answering. So I'm not going to, put words in anybody's mouth or belittle anybody's feelings, because everybody is going to have a different take on that. Could he help Nashville? Definitely, I think so. Although you have to ask yourself whether his sort of revival this year is just the fact that he's playing alongside, arguably the two best players in the NHL right now.
Yes. And if you look at his assists in the playoffs, that's where they're coming from.
Yeah. And see, I mean, if you watch him play, he is playing very well. It's just, I think the question becomes, are you willing to bet that he's going to have that same sort of impact playing next to Matt Duchene as he did Connor McDavid?
Right.
And the answer might be a little bit different. Now, Roman Yossi's back there. Roman Josi, we know, is a great playmaker who can unlock, sort of an extra dimension for a lot of forwards he's on the ice with. So maybe that's a selling point. But yeah, to me, that's a bit of an X factor.
Yes.
One, obviously Kane is going to get a big contract from somebody this year.
And bless him.
Yeah, I just think it's got to be the right situation. And I'm not sure if Nashville is the right situation.
No, this is just personally, I would pass on that. And I think there are other options, and we've talked about this before, and we're going to talk about it here in just a minute, but you can replace Filip Forsberg, by aggregate. And I would rather go that route than the risk reward balance of a player with kind of the history in the background like Evander Kane. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, so if the
That's
Predators
just
do
my
bring
opinion.
in somebody by aggregate, who are some of the people they can bring in? Could potentially see more than one person come in. Also, does David Poile swing for the fences and try to find a big trade this offseason? An interesting topic that's coming up in just a second. But first, want to mention today's show brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. They got something coming out called Brownie Batter Puffs. Now, we've told you about puffs before. They are a protein-infused marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. They've had fantastic flavors like cinnamon churro, birthday cake, all that kind of good jazz. But brownie batter, to me, is a whole different tier of sweet, sweet goodness. Because honestly, Anne, who doesn't love brownies? We all love brownie batter. We all remember licking it out of the bowl when our moms made it as a kid. And I'm sure your children quite
Yes.
enjoy licking the spatulas and whatnot whenever you're
Yep.
in the kitchen. So yeah, Built Bar took that concept and made it into one of their Built Bar Puffs. Yep, it is basically a protein bar that tastes like a treat. Like we said, all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, but Brownie Batter Puffs are only 140 calories, 17 grams of protein, and only 7 grams of sugar. So it's the perfect pick-me-up for any single day. They're also made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of other health benefits. So the Brownie Batter Puffs will have you completely forgetting that you're eating a protein bar. No need to pinch yourself. This is real life. So go to built.com to get Brownie Batter Puffs now. And while you're there, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Yeah, so we're talking about options if Filip Forsberg does not come back to the Nashville Predators next season. That is, kind of the doomsday scenario. And
Dark thoughts.
yeah, so we talked about maybe replacing him with one guy, replacing Forsberg with a big name free agent. That is an option. Another option is trade, and
Yeah, this would be this would have to be done really well, I think, to make it feel worth it. But again, David Poile can David Poile. So who are the people that you think maybe you could bring in via trade that would help balance out the loss of somebody like Filip Forsberg?
well, again, are you swinging for the fences here?
See,
Because if so,
mm-hmm,
then there are a couple of people on the block.
mm-hmm.
One of those guys that seems, and I'm kind of surprised he hasn't been traded yet, was JT Miller in Vancouver. Now,
Yeah.
reportedly the reason he wasn't traded at the deadline was because the asking price from Vancouver was way too high. Remember, they almost made the playoffs.
So close.
They came from literally, came roaring back. Was one of the best teams in the NHL by the end of the year. So,
Yeah.
but Vancouver right now is an absolute cap hell. JT Miller is coming off a phenomenal season. And so he is going to get a big haul for for Vancouver when they do decide to move him.
So worth it? Do you think you swing for the fence for someone like that?
Well, that's the thing. Do you feel like you have pieces where you can go out and make that move? Because I'm going to say it's probably going to require some combination of a young player who's ready to play right now, a blue chip prospect, at least one first round pick, maybe two, and maybe, one or two other sort of fringe pieces. Maybe, Vancouver throws in sort of like a depth player to kind of balance that out. So if you're Nashville, it comes down to this: like, how committed are you to winning right now?
Yes.
We've heard David Poile say he's confident in this core. He thinks this core can win. So how confident are you that this core can win? Because if you are, then maybe that price is worth it. Maybe, you don't need the 2 first-round picks because you think they're going to be in the 20s the next 2. But I'm sure David Poile maybe has a different opinion on that than we do as people watching kind of the direction of this team right now.
Well, and he always points out, he knows a little bit more than we do, which is, of course, true. He's not going to tip his hand too much, to media or fans right away. I hesitate on something like that because, the Predators, I just don't know that I think that they are a year or 2 away from a true Stanley Cup contender. I mean, you really have to be confident in that. You have to be very confident in that to make a deal like that, where you're giving away top, first round picks. You're giving away a potential, 3 years from now, a potential fit for the Nashville Predators lineup where you could have a top 6 guy, in developing. I don't know. That one makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because I'm not 100% sure that that's where the Predators are. But I will say, when you listen to David Poile talk, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where he is. So I could see him doing something like this, but for me personally, that I don't know that it's time to go all in, like with a trade and giving up that.
Well, we don't think it's time, but it sounds like David Poile is still kind of leaning that way. I mean, he kind of said he's going to kind of reload if Forsberg doesn't resign. And if your plan to replace Forsberg is just promote some people on the roster and see what happens.
Well, that's not going to work.
Yeah, then that's not going to work. And at that point, you might as well rebuild.
Yeah.
So if you're swinging from the fences, is somebody like JT Miller out there. Another guy that's kind of been mentioned is, we heard him a little bit at the trade deadline, was Matt Tkachuk, who now is having a pretty solid postseason for the Calgary Flames. I think what happens with his future kind of hinges on what happens with Johnny Gaudreau. Johnny Gaudreau goes to free agency, signs someplace else, then not only does Calgary have a little bit more cap space, but they kind of have a little bit more urgency to give Tkachuk what he wants. Plus, he's a restricted free agent, so they, kind of have control over
over what happens.
Yeah.
Wouldn't he be and he is a little bit, and I, love him to death. He's a little bit of a punk. Would he not be fun with Ryan Johansson?
Yeah.
I sit and look at that and I'm like, that's a lot of spice that you could put together and irritate some people.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I don't know.
Kind of an interesting team to play against.
I mean, it's just fun to think. I mean, that one's a little bit fun to think about because they would chafe some players, the two of them together. But and again, you come back to where does David Poile think this team is? And can he, if you bring in somebody like Matthew Tkachuk, that's not the same as bringing in a Johnny Gaudreau. Is a Matthew Tkachuk and a few other little pieces enough to push Nashville over the edge and be as competitive as Poile indicates he thinks this team is? I don't know.
Would. You don't think Tkachuk would?
I think he would be a huge piece, but I think I don't think he's it. Like, you bring in Johnny Gaudreau and you do a little tweaking, and then that's
Tkachuk's a 100-point player, though, and so is Gaudreau.
Yeah. I just don't necessarily think they're I don't think they're the exact same tier. I'm not saying that like Matthew Tkachuk, seriously, just the fun in me would love that. But I think David Poile's going to have to plan for some other, he is going to have to count on, for instance, players like Luke Kunin having way different seasons.
Yeah. That's a lot of trust. That's a lot of trust.
That's a lot of trust.
Including, for somebody like Ellie Tolvanen, where you clearly didn't trust him down the stretch.
Right. So part of this is, does he, can we Are they going to trade those two? Or are they going to get rid of those two? Are we, you've got to have a little bit. I don't know. I just feel like you need a little bit, maybe a little bit more. I don't know.
Well, there's other trade pieces out there that maybe aren't that big, sort of, step in and replace Filip Forsberg as an individual type of player. There's guys like out there like Jake DeBrusk.
True.
Brock Besser is another Vancouver Canuck that might be on the market. A couple of guys who, are nowhere as close to the level that even Filip Forsberg is on right now.
Right.
But, if maybe that's one piece and then you sign another piece of free agency and then all of a sudden you're closer to kind of building something on an aggregate and maybe give the Predators a little bit more depth too.
Yeah, and I also think for as much as, when we think about this team losing Filip Forsberg, you think we've got to replace Filip Forsberg, but you also, as you're thinking about moving pieces, you have to remember that there are some defensive things that this team has to address if they're going to be competitive too. And so you kind of have to leave money and all of that in the back of your mind, because replacing Filip Forsberg, however you do it, is going to cost, but you also you still have some other things that you're going to have to spend some money on. And, it may be fiscally the best way to do it is to do it kind of by aggregate and fill in some pieces.
Well, what do you fix on defense? Because your six is kind of locked up right now, unless Borowiecki sort of becomes seventh defenseman. I mean, you have, Yossi Fabro, Ekholm Carrier, and then you have Jeremy Lauzon, who the Predators clearly value.
They love, yeah.
So, I mean, if you're going to make a move on defense, what do you do there? Or do you look and say, you know what, maybe it's not necessarily the defenders who are to blame for some of those defensive absences? Maybe it's team defense.
System,
and you need to do something there. Because I can tell you there was a lot of forwards on the Nashville Predators last season who weren't good defensively in their own zone that kind of complicated some of those problems.
Yeah. And I look at somebody like Jeremy Lauzon, and he was a long-term acquisition. Poile's been very clear about that. This is somebody we see with this franchise for a while. And I agree with that. And I really like what we saw out of him. But I'm not sure that next year is going to be his big year. This is, you have to wonder, how far out are you going to have him get to where you need him to be? And I agree with you, just defensively, the Predators across the board, whoever is on the ice has to do better. But I don't know. I just feel like defensively, this team has to address some things. And the third defensive pairing has been a trick all season. It has not been an easy. I mean, at the beginning of the season, Boro and Benning was great. They were one of the best defensive pairings in the league. And then just the wheels have came off the bus. So, we've got some areas, and it can't all be about Filip Forsberg. I mean, it mainly needs to be about that whole and, what you do with that. But you got to be able to bank some things for other holes.
Yeah. And there's options out there. There's definitely some options out there. So, or at least I'm talking about in terms of defense.
Right.
I don't see Chris Letang going there, but I mean, you have somebody like Josh Manson in Colorado, who's been a good depth piece for them, although I'm sure he's going to get paid. Nikita Zadorov, Ian Cole, there's a couple of these guys that would be good, sort of add some glue to that. There's, second, third pair. So there's options out there. Let's talk about replacing Filip Forsberg in aggregate. Who are, sort of to me the next tier? Nazem Kadri, who had 87 this year. That was his career best season, and Kadri, I think, is a good player, but I don't think we're expecting him to ever sort of have the kind of statistical year he's had as he's had this year. And doesn't seem like he'll be back in Colorado just because of their cap situation, although never say never. Who else, Anne? Who else in that kind of free agency list could you see maybe coming in and sort of being a lead by aggregate sort of
Yeah.
player?
Well, at the trade deadline, you were all about Phil Kessel, but I don't see that being a move, which makes me very sad. But you mentioned Colorado, and I'm thinking that Colorado is going to be a great place to shop when you look at what they have this year right now, and this is it. Like they're going to be putting some folks out there, and they've got some folks that are kind of interesting if you're looking at combining like Burakovsky, I can't say him, Valerie Nichushkin. Thank you. I can't say his name, but like those are two guys where I'm like, I would look at that. Niederreiter is out there.
Yeah.
That's somebody that maybe on Palat maybe would be out there. He's a little bit older, bless his heart, but
I mean, he's younger than me. Let's take it easy.
Look, they're all young to me, but in hockey years, you know how they have the whole hockey years thing. So, but I think looking at Colorado, there's a couple guys there that would be kind of interesting to look at. There are some good, UFAs out there where if you could get one or two of them for the price of a Filip Forsberg, you could get some bang for your buck. So those are some that I would be interested in looking at. But again, you have to wonder with Colorado, is it those players or is it what they've created? Right. And what they're doing now, is that going to translate somewhere else? But I would look there. I mean, I would head to Denver with my checkbook.
Yeah. Burakovsky is certainly an interesting one. And of course, he has some cup experience with the Washington Capitals, which is something Nashville didn't have last year. No players on that team have ever won a Stanley Cup.
Crazy? That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, he's certainly an interesting one. Vincent Trocheck in Carolina is another interesting one, although it kind of sounds like he may be, the Canes may have the ability to bring him back with a little bit of a raise. There's definitely some players out there. And again, maybe the move is getting 2 or 3 guys who kind of add up to, $10 million a year. Who aren't going to score, 40 goals in a season, but can be reliable depth scoring and bring that to Nashville, because that was exactly what David Poile said in his press conference last week. That was sort of their Achilles heel that disappeared, was their top line did everything and nobody sort of beyond them, kind of stepped up.
Exactly. That's exactly why I think this may be the route that is best for the Nashville Predators, because even if you on that second line don't have somebody who's going to be a 40 goal scorer, you get somebody in there who's scoring 20 goals, 25 goals. And if they can get some things going with whether it's Ryan Johansson or Mikael Granlund, you could really have much more of a 1-2 punch. And that's something that this team absolutely has to have. Whether you replace Filip Forsberg with, a top tier guy, whether Filip Forsberg resigns, they have to address that. And it may be the best way to do it by bringing in a couple of guys in place of Filip Forsberg and sort of spreading some offensive wealth a little bit better. I don't want to see Filip Forsberg go, but if he goes, I think this is the route that would make the most sense for Nashville moving forward, instead of dropping the money on one big guy. Unless it's Johnny Gaudreau.
Yeah. There's certain players that you could justify spending.
Yes.
For.
Yeah.
One last bonus question. If Filip Forsberg goes, who do you think he signs with?
I'm really trying not to think about it, because there's a part of me that is numbers, analytics, statistics. A large part of me is a heart hockey person. But I see Filip Forsberg looking for somewhere that is a very close cup contender, where he would be kind of the cherry on top to get them there. I don't see him going with a team in the same position that Nashville is in. I really feel like if Filip Forsberg makes the decision to leave Nashville and go after the money, he is going to go after the money and a cup. I don't see, he's going to go with somebody who is very close. I don't know who that is because I'm just not interested. I'm just not interested.
Yeah.
There are some things we shall not talk about. I don't know. Where do you think he goes? Do you have some guesses where you think
I
he
don't
might
know
end up?
because there's a lot of top teams out there that are so close to the cap that
Yes.
you don't really see how they could sort of make it work.
Right.
The Rangers theoretically, have some pieces that they can kind of move around. You also maybe look at a team that is sort of on the fringe and kind of moving some stuff around. We're looking at it from the other way. If the Calgary Flames lose Johnny Gaudreau, could Filip Forsberg be Johnny Gaudreau's replacement? Could it be the other way around to what we were just talking about?
I could see that.
Yeah, and then the other option is maybe there's an up-and-coming team on there that you kind of want to hit your bet on. The New York Islanders sort of got destroyed by injuries this season, but remember, they had made 2 straight Eastern Conference Finals up until this point. The Red Wings have a absolute crap ton of cap space and
some great youth. Yeah.
Great youth, including a lot of guys from Forsberg's native Sweden. Is that a potential fit? Is that somebody that kind of is the next step of their rebuild? So it's very, very intriguing to see what they are going to do.
I hate the thought of that. I hate everything that you just said.
Luckily, to ease the full circle moment fear in fans' mind, Minnesota is in cap hell, so I don't think that is going to
Can you even imagine?
I'll be honest, I would laugh.
I would
laugh
cry.
a little bit.
I just can't imagine. That one I can't get my mind around. If Rem Pitlick wasn't one thing, then Filip Forsberg, I can only take so much.
Yeah. You couldn't deny it wouldn't be a little bit funny.
Not funny in the somebody fell down the stairs kind of funny. Maybe.
Yeah.
But not.
It's collectively us.
Yeah. Yeah. Not good. How about if we just, let's just get Filip Forsberg re-signed. There's an idea.
There we go. That'll solve everything.
World peace right there.
World peace right there. So yeah, that is a very interesting discussion, and that's something we're gonna have to keep our mind on as we get a little bit deeper into the off season. Until then, Anne, where can people find your work online?
You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com, and you can find me on Twitter at AnnK_Mama-on-Ice.
I'm Nick Morgan. You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com. Be sure to follow the podcast at LO_Predators on Twitter. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let us know who you think the Predators should go after this offseason if Filip Forsberg does not come back. Even if he does come back, let us know who else you would like to see the Predators bring in. That's going to do it for us here today on the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Ann and I are going to go get some much needed rest and try to be a little bit less congested for Wednesday's show. We'll see you then, guys. Take care.